This is a New York beauty block, and it's in several of our quilt patterns, and so I wanted to show you how easy it is to make this block. There's a couple elements of curved piecing, and then in the center here, this arch with these perfect points is sewn with paper piecing, and that's how you're able to get those perfect points. The block is sewn slightly oversized so that you're able to trim it down and get the perfect size block that you need to fit into your quilt. So if you'd like to try making a New York beauty block, you've come to the right video, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to do it. So let's get started. So one helpful tip in making a New York beauty block is to add an extra 1/8 of an inch around the straight edges of the template pieces. So anywhere there's a straight edge, we're going to add an extra 1/8 of an inch. So in order to do that, we take our straight ruler that has an 1/8 of an inch, and you can see right there is my 1/8 of an inch. I'm putting it on that outside line, and I'm adding an 1/8 of an inch on that end. And then the same thing on this one. I'm going to add an 1/8 of an inch over on this one as well. And what that does is it just gives us a little bit more fudge factor in case our sewing is off a little bit. So there, those two pieces are marked. Now to do it on this smaller piece, we're going to do the same thing. There are two straight edges on this. So we're going to line up the 1/8 of an inch line here. And that's going to get trimmed off later. But for now, when we're making these pieces, it just gives us a little bit of extra. It's amazing how when you're making a block like this that has curved piecing and is a little bit more involved, how you end up not having a block the right size. Oops, I missed part of that there. There we go. And then the last piece would be the large background piece. And we'll add an 1/8 of an inch to those straight edges as well. Now you'll notice that I had to tape this little extra piece right here on, and I basically just put a piece of tape on the back to hold it together. You want it on the back because you're probably going to be ironing on this top piece. We have one more line to mark here. Actually, I lied. We have a couple of lines because we have this one right here. I have to mark an 1/8 of an inch out from this one. And we also have an 1/8 of an inch out from this one. There, we have all of our pieces marked. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get some Elmer's glue, and we're going to glue these pieces to the paper side of some freezer paper. So the freezer paper that I'm using is Reynolds freezer paper, and it's plastic coated. It comes in a nice big box on a roll, and it lasts a really long time, but this works great for ironing onto fabrics. So I've cut out my piece of paper that's large enough for my template, and I'm going to take just a little bit of regular Elmer's glue. It's white school glue. I'm going to if it's not clogged up, we're going to take and put a little bit on the back of this piece. Don't need a whole lot, just a little bit. And then we're going to lay this on the paper side of the freezer paper and just press that down. So you see we have the shiny side on this side, and this is the paper side. We've glued the template with the printing up on the paper side of the freezer paper. And here's the other one. Again, I'm going to put some glue on the back. Flip it over. Again, I'm on the paper side of the freezer paper. The shiny side is facing down. And just glue that on there. And then once we have that on there, we just take a regular scissors and we're going to just roughly cut around outside of the dashed line of the template. And we're going to cut outside of our 1/8 inch lines that we drew. And then we'll be using this to cut out the shapes in the fabric. Same thing with this one. We're going to cut outside of our 1/8 inch lines. And then we'll be pressing this onto fabric and using it as a guide to cut out our pieces. There we go. So we have our two templates ready to go so that we can cut out the pieces from fabric. So I'll get the fabric and we'll get started. So now we've laid our templates that are on top of the freezer paper on the right side of our fabric, and we're going to just press them down so that they're nice and flat, all pressed down on the fabric. And there you can see that we've now got the freezer paper pressed to the fabric so that we will be able to cut out these shapes. And then for our arch template, we needed 2 strips. We needed a green 4.5 inch strip and an orange 4.5 strip. So we have those cut as well. And now I'll show you how I trim this quarter circle piece and the other background piece. So I've now separated the 2 pieces so that it's a little bit easier to work with. And I have my straight edge ruler lined up so that I'm putting the ruler right at the edge of where I drew that extra 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to cut that off like that. And come over here and do the other side. Same thing, put it on that 1/8 inch so that I'm including that in the piece of fabric. And cut that off. And then we have to do one more thing. So now we have to do this edge, and you can actually do that with your rotary cutter. So I'm just going to put it right here. And again, we want to do on this outside line. So it's the outside dashed line, and I'm going to just start going nice and slow and follow that gentle curve. Kind of helps having a smaller rotary cutter. You can stop and reposition your piece if you need to. And you can also cut this out with a scissors if that would work easier for you. But I find that this works pretty good of just following the line nice and slowly, making sure that the template is flat, the template and the paper are flat, and just follow it nice and easy like this. And there we go. So this one is all ready. So then you can now remove the freezer paper. It just comes right off. If you haven't ironed it on too good, which I probably did a really good job of ironing it on there. And hold it down so that the bias doesn't stretch. And there we go. There's our quarter circle piece. And this template can be reused. You can probably use this, the shiny side, about 8 times. So you'll be able to use the same template for all of your quarter circle pieces. Now I would do the same thing with the background piece. I'm going to put the 1/8 so that the edge of the ruler is where that 1/8 line is on the straight. Do the same thing up here on this side, and then I'm going to take my rotor and do the 2 ends as well. You know, leaving that extra 1/8 of an inch, and then I'll take my rotary cutter and do this last cut. Now we're ready to start working with the center arch template, and this one is paper pieced, and these segments are going to alternate between green and orange. So the orange are going to be the spikes in the arch, and the alternating segments will be the green. And so in order to get started, we need to measure these lines, and you put it 1/4 inch outside of the line and go past it. So let me see, I want to get where the 1 is there. Here. So there we'll start 1/4 inch beyond, and 1/4 inch beyond this end would be about 4 1/4. So if you wanted to be judicious with your fabric, you could cut it at 4 1/4, but I'm actually going to cut the strips at 4 1/2. So I've cut an orange strip and a green strip at 4 1/2 inches. And in order to get started, we want to lay the 2 strips right sides together. And because green is my background and that's the first piece, it's going to be placed right sides with the orange, and the wrong side of the green is going to go next to the back side of the template. And this first piece is the only one that's kind of weird, and then after that it'll make a lot more sense. But so one of the things that you want to do is you want to fold the lines so that it's easy to work with. So you just take a postcard and fold the lines over. Okay, so this first line is the one we're working with between the A1 and the A2, and we want that line to be at least below 1/4 inch, or about below 1/2 inch of the fabric, and you want to just center the template right on there, put it right there, and then we're going to just take and put a pin right in here to hold those pieces in place. If I can get it in there. There we go. So that will hold the 2 pieces together. So now I'm going to sew on the line between A1 and A2, and I'm going to lower the stitch length on my sewing machine to 2.0, and I'm going to start stitching outside of the seam allowance here, and I'm going to go past the seam allowance here. And I'm not going to show you the actual sewing, but I'll come back after I've done that sewing. So now you can see I've sewn on the line. I started here outside of the seam allowance, and I ended up here outside of the seam allowance. And the next thing we want to do is we want to fold back on that line, and we want to use our add a quarter ruler. And this is an add a quarter ruler. See, it says, I don't know if you can see that or not, but it says add a quarter, and it has like a little lip here, and that lip is what rides along the paper. So it's going to ride right there next to the edge of the paper. It'd actually help if I put the postcard in and give it a little bit of thickness to butt up against. There, so now it's up against that. I'm going to trim off this excess. I'm going to open the paper back up, turn it over, and now I'm going to flip the orange fabric like this, and I'm going to press. Now we have flipped it over so that the orange is out of the way. It's been pressed away from the green. And we're going to, with our add a quarter ruler, just trim off this extra of the green. And we're going to do that on a straight line, perpendicular to the edge of the fabric. And the reason we're doing that is because now we have a nice straight edge when we need to add this piece to the next section. And later we'll be trimming this up even with this raw edge here. So now we still have the orange and the green pressed opposite directions. And we're going to take and, with our postcard, fold over the line between A2 and A3. So put the postcard right along that line. Get it where you can see it better here. Right along that line between A2 and A3. And fold it over the postcard. And in order to do that, we kind of have to rip this little seam here. We have to rip that so that this will fold. So you do a little rip there. Now it should fold nicely. Yep, now it just folds over real nice. And again, we want to be able to have a straight edge of this orange piece. So again, we're going to put the add a quarter ruler straight or perpendicular to the edge of the fabric. Cut this off so that we have our orange piece with a nice straight edge. And then we're going to now take and put our add a quarter ruler on the edge of our folded paper and trim it up. Now when we open it up, we have like our first points beginning to take shape. Now we flip the template back over, and now we're going to take our straight edge and line it up. We're going to put right sides together, but we're going to line up our straight edge, the green, with this. Probably don't need to always put a pin in, but I kind of like to hold things in place. So there we have that lined up along the straight edge, and now we're going to sew on that line between A2 and A3. So now you can see I've sewn on the line from between A2 and A3, and I started outside the seam allowance and went outside this seam allowance. Now we're going to flip it over and we're going to press it. And then we're going to take and press it this way. And then we flip it over. And now we're going to put the postcard between lines A3 and A4. And in order to do that, we have to rip this little line a little bit. So we're going to rip this down here, down there to that line. And we'll put the postcard right here, right on that line, and fold this down like this. And again, we want our green piece to be straight, so we're going to cut it straight first, right there like that. And now we take the added trim ruler. You get that paper out of the way and put it right along the paper and trim along this edge. Fold this open again and look at it from the front, and there we have our next section. So now we're going to take the green strip and we're going to line it up with this one and kind of put it in the center of the, we'll put it in the center of the previous piece of fabric. I sometimes kind of look to see where the lines are. So the lines are actually way up here. So I'm going to actually move this up more like this to make sure we're covering it. And then I'll just stick a pin in here. And then on this other side, I'm going to sew on the line between A3 and A4. So you can see that I've sewn on the line between A3 and A4. And now I'm going to rip this down because we're going to need to fold on the line between A4 and A5. And on the back here, we press this, and then we pressed away from the green. And now we're flipping it over, keeping everything nice and straight when we flip it back and forth. And we're going to add that postcard now on the line between A4 and A5, fold it over, and again we want our orange piece to be flat for the next time we need to add it. So we're going to cut it off like this. And then we're going to take and put our add a quarter ruler along the paper and trim this. So now we open the paper back up, we flip it over, and then once again we're going to take our green piece and put it right sides together with the orange piece, and we will then flip it over and sew on the line between A4 and A5. And you'll keep doing this, alternating the orange and green pieces all the way to the end of this template. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and when I come back I'll show you how we trim this up. So now we've paper pieced the entire arch. You can see it's done on this side and it's done on this side. So the next thing we want to do is we want to keep everything in place. So we're basically going to take some spray starch like this Mary Ellen's Best Press, and we're going to soak this really good. And then we're going to press it nice and flat. We're going to press it nice and flat so that all of these pieces will stay in place and that the biased edges will have a better chance of not going where you don't want them to go. So now it's all nice and pressed, nice and flat, and we're going to trim it up by starting to first trim these straight edges. And remember, we added an extra 1/8 of an inch, so we're going to line it up so that we're outside of that 1/8 of an inch, and trim that off. So you can see we've left the extra 1/8 of an inch beyond the seam allowance. We're going to come over and do the other straight edge. Again, we're leaving that extra 1/8 of an inch, which is going to give us a little extra fudge factor in case our block isn't sewn quite right. Okay, now that we have the two straight edges trimmed, we need to trim the curved edges. And once again, I'm going to use my rotary cutter and just start down here, holding the paper down so that it's nice and firm, and just gradually going around that curve. It gets kind of tough in places where there's a bunch of intersecting fabrics. But I'm just going nice and slow, trying to go right through these intersections, staying right on the line so that I'm leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we can reposition. See, here's something I missed here. Didn't quite get that. There we go. Okay. We're just going to keep following the line. It does help having the small 18mm rotary cutter. It makes it a little easier to go around these curves. And there we go. So that's one curve that's been done. Now we'll do the other one. Every once in a while, you just kind of have to let your hands up so that the paper can lay flat again. Okay, and there's the other one cut. That wasn't that hard. So now this is what it looks like when it's trimmed up. They look much nicer when they're trimmed up, don't they? Next, we're going to remove the paper, and it's always best to start on the end where you sewed your last piece. So for us, that would be at the A11 because we started at the A1. And you basically just take and fold the paper back and fold it again a couple times and just gently tug at it. And it separates fairly easy like that. Then we take and put our finger underneath the next one to kind of pull it up and gently tug at that so that it pulls out from underneath the seam. And then again, we're going to fold this one a couple different directions to make it easy to break off. And then just give it a gentle tug. And because we sewed at the 2.0 stitch length, which is a shorter stitch length, these stitches are fairly easy to come out. So see, I'm gently pulling, it's coming right out from underneath the stitches. We're not leaving any fabric there, or any paper there in the fabric, because we don't want to do that. And then just gently separate it away. And we keep doing this all the way until we're at the other end. And there you have it. We've removed all of the paper from the back. Now we're ready to sew on the outer background piece and the inner 1/4 circle. So we're going to be starting with this outside background piece. And it's easiest if you start with the largest pieces, and also you want to start with the concave piece, which is the one that looks like a C. So this looks like a C, and we need to get the middle of this to match up with this middle point. So in order to get that middle, we're basically going to take this and fold it in half. And we can even give it a little finger press when we get it folded in half here. Having trouble getting it to actually do the halfway mark. There we go. So I'm going to give it a little finger press. And then basically, in order to show where that center is, we're going to take a little nip right here in the seam allowance. And when we open that up, that creates a little nip in the seam allowance. And that's how we'll be able to match up the center with the center. So now we're going to match that center notch with this center point. And get it so that those edges are just meeting right there like that. And then we're going to take and pin it here in the center. Then we need to pin these sides. So we're going to take and come over here like this and match up these side edges like that. We're going to line them up just like that, and we're going to put a pin in. Then we're going to do the same thing over on the other side. So we're going to get these lined up just like that and put a pin in. And then as you're sewing, you just want to keep lining up the edge of this top piece with that bottom piece and sew along like that. Now, if you want to put more pins in, you can. Just kind of figure out where the middle would be again and put another pin in. And then you can figure out where the middle would be again and put another pin in. So you can put as many pins in as will make you feel comfortable, but it is going to kind of get that little ripple effect on top. So I'll show this to you. I'll sew this and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. So we've sewn at a scant 1/4 inch all the way along that outside edge, and you can see it kind of leaves that top concave piece a little bit ruffly. So we're going to start by, setting the seam. And then we're going to press it in the direction that it wants to go. And it's going to want to go away from those points. So we're going to press it in that direction. And now we'll be ready to sew on the 1/4 circle. So once again, we want to be putting the concave piece, which is the one with the C, on top of the convex piece. And in order to figure out where the center of this 1/4 circle, I basically folded it in half and with the scissors took a little nip out of that corner, which gives us that little notch right there, which is going to allow us to line up at the middle. Then I also took and pressed this so that I would know where the middle of this is. So we're basically going to line up the two middles and get it so that it's right on the edge like that. And then start pinning like we did the last time. So we're going to pin it in the middle. And I'm putting a pin on either side of the middle. And then we take these end pieces and once again curve them around and get them to have the straight edges line up just like we did before. And the same thing over on the other side. We're going to have these straight edges line up. And sometimes it helps to put a pin in the side first because it kind of holds it in place since it wants to move out of place. And then it makes it easier to pin it up here. And so it's kind of easy to continue to pin it by doing this, by putting it on the other side and pulling it until you see that it gets in place, and then stick some pins in. And you can pin this as much as you want, which will really help get that 1/4 inch seam accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and keep pinning this, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I have it all pinned. So now I have it all pinned, and I'm actually going to sew it with the pins on the bottom and do a scant 1/4 inch all the way along this curve. And so see, you can put as many pins as you want, but it really helps get that all aligned where it needs to be. So I'll go sew that, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. So here's what it looks like when it's all sewn. And when we open this up, you can tell that it kind of wants to press this way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to, once again, press away from the points. And do that same thing on the back so that you get it nice and flat. So here's the block. It's all pressed up, nice and neat. And we gave it another shot with best press so that things would stay where they need to. And so now this block is supposed to be 8 inches unfinished. And this is an 8-inch ruler. It's Quilter Select, and it has like this textured surface on the back, which makes it grip things a little better, which is nice. So when we lay this on here, we're now going to have to square it up. But what we need to pay attention to is there needs to be a 1/4 inch right there outside of that point, which you can see that there is. And then also down here, there needs to be a 1/4 inch outside of this point as well, which there is. So that looks pretty good. And basically I'm going to trim it up to an 8-inch block, and then I'll show you what that's like once it's done. So there's our perfectly trimmed up 8-inch unfinished block that's ready to be used in our quilt. And you'll notice that I have a 1/4 inch there, so that's going to go in the seam allowance, and I have at least a 1/4 inch there. So this block turned out just fine. So you can see that it's really not that difficult to sew a New York Beauty block, and you get these beautiful points and what appears to be a very complex block, but isn't really that hard to do. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and will give sewing a New York Beauty block a try. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.